You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. And today, it's a very special episode because it's our 400th episode. And so we'll be discussing a special episode of Doctor Who that doesn't involve the Doctor called Downtime. We'll get to that in a second. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to get your very own Secrets of Doctor Who t-shirt or phone case or other kinds of merch that we make available by visiting sqpn.com/merch. I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network I'm sure you'll enjoy called The Secrets of Star Trek, which you can find wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Star Trek. Now, before we get to the recap, just as an explanation, this is our 400th episode. We've been doing The Secrets of Doctor Who over its time span of, I think it's like over a decade.
Since the very beginning since the very first episode of Peter Capaldi,
right,
originally aired.
And in the first few years, there was gaps between new seasons. But for about the last 7 years, we've basically been going every week, covering classic Who, new Who, and then whenever there's new series with new doctors, we've covered those as well, of course. And so when we reach big round numbers, because we have 10 fingers and 10 toes, most of us, we like to mark that as a special occasion. And so we decided to do, for this one, talk about Downtime, which is a 1995 fan production. But before we get deeper into that, Jimmy, why don't you give us a recap of what happens in Downtime?
So this week we get the Ultimate Dr. Light episode. The Doctor is nowhere to be found, so his companions have to pick up the slack. We open in a Tibetan monastery in 1980, where former companion Victoria Waterfield, from the second Doctor's time, has been summoned by the voice of her deceased father. Only it turns out it isn't her father who summoned her there. We then flash forward to 1995, where Victoria is the Vice-Chancellor of New World University, a school that seeks to help troubled youth known as Chili's. But it's really a front to bring the Great Intelligence back into the world. The Great Intelligence, which controlled the Yetis, is partially manifested through the university's computer system, and it has plans to take over the newly created World Wide Web and, of course, the human race. To do that, it needs to get an artifact known as the Locus, which is a small figurine of a Yeti. It suspects that the Brigadier has the Locus, so it has Victoria hire journalist Sarah Jane Smith to look for the Brig. However, the Brigadier is forewarned on the astral plane by Daniel Hinton, a former student at the Brigadier's school who is now a student at New World University. Eventually, the Locus is found on the houseboat of new character Kate Lethbridge Stewart, the Brigadier's daughter, who hadn't spoken to her father in 6 years. One consequence of which is that the Brigadier doesn't know that he has a 4-year-old grandson. The Locus is returned to New World University and is smashed, allowing the Great Intelligence to gain new power. It's possessing the body of Professor Travers, who was in The Abominable Snowmen and The Web of Fear, and who died in 1980. The Intelligence starts hopping bodies and transforming people into Yetis. It also spreads its new web, because remember, this was web-based, the Web of Fear. It spreads its new web through a satellite, creating a World Wide Web of a different kind. But before it can complete its plan to take over the world, the Brigadier lets Sarah Jane Smith know that they need to pull the plug on the university's mainframe. Together, Sarah Jane, Victoria, who's had a change of heart, and a Yeti that was formerly Daniel Hinton managed to do this. The result is that the Great Intelligence loses its power, and Professor Travers is finally allowed to die properly. Afterwards, the Brigadier finally gets to meet his grandson. The end.
So your overall impression of this one, Jimmy?
Well, I've seen quite a number of these fan productions that were made after the show went off the air in 1989 and before it came back in 2005. There were a bunch of fans who wanted more visual Doctor Who. I mean, of course, there were novels, and then there were audio plays and things like that, but they wanted more televised stuff. And so some of them did productions involving Doctor Who with the name taken off of it because they couldn't get the rights from the BBC. So like there's a series that follow several videos that follow the Sixth Doctor and Perry, only they're called like The Stranger and Miss Brown. And they are really horrible. They are not well done at all, but there are a number of videos that are much better done where they didn't go to the BBC, but under British licensing law, if you created a character, you still held the rights to it. That's why, for example, the estate of, and I'm blanking on his name, the guy who created the Daleks, has to be consulted in order to be able to use the Daleks. And in the same way, all of these side characters, other than the Doctor himself, were created by writers who could give permission for the use of their characters. And so the fans went to the relevant writers and got permission to use the Brigadier and Sarah Jane Smith and Victoria Waterfield and Professor Travers and the Great Intelligence and the Yeti and put together a new story. And this is one of the better ones. I thought it was surprisingly good for being a very low budget fan film. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was directed by Christopher Barry, who was one of the directors on the Doctor Who TV show. So it's competently directed. It is not perfect, but it was a lot better than I expected it was going to be the first time I watched it, and rewatching it this time. Yeah, it's pretty well done.
I mean, it's better than some of the lower end of the televised Classic Who episodes. I mean,
yeah,
it's certainly done by professionals who, I mean, a fan production sort of implies a bunch of like high school kids with video cameras, which is what I did when I was in high school. We did fan productions for Star Trek shows, but these were professional crews, professional equipment, professional ability, professional actors and writers and stuff. So, I mean, better than some of the Sixth Doctor stuff, the twin invasion and that sort of twin dilemma.
Twin dilemma. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Better than that sort of thing. And, we have some of our better companions from the classic era in the Brigadier and in Sarah Jane. So, yeah.
And Victoria, and this really gives us the conclusion to Victoria's story, at least as of now. Mm-hmm. And I mean, she survives this story, but this takes the basic plots that she was involved in, the Abominable Snowmen and the Web of Fear, and builds on those and gives her a resolved character arc at the end of this. This has also been effectively canonized by the fact that Kate Stewart, who is introduced here as a young woman, is now the head of unit in the Doctor Who universe. So that effectively canonizes this adventure.
It's interesting, given that the Kate of this story is a single mom, essentially. I don't know if the dad was involved, but she has a son. Yeah, and is not in unit.
Right. She said she split from her ex. We don't know if he was a husband or a boyfriend, but her ex, Jonathan, 2 years before this is set. And she's not in unit. She is not a fan of guns, but by the end, she has to use one.
Right.
And so you can see, and she also gets involved in this paranormal adventure. She, at one point, has to let the ghost of Daniel Hinton do automatic write-in through her on a computer system.
Right.
And they use the term automatic write-in.
Yeah.
But to hack a computer system, which she doesn't have the skills for, she has to let this ghost do it through her hands. So she's got the paranormal background. She's got the gun use, which is required in unit. She's got the unit heritage. And so it's kind of a natural progression for her to follow in her father's footsteps after this adventure.
Given her son, who would be, in his early 30s today, if the natural progression of time, it would be interesting to see if they ever bring him back in a production of Doctor Who today with the 15th or 16th or whatever Doctor.
Or especially if we get a unit spinoff. They're likely to want to address him there.
Right. So that would be interesting. Is this the last time Do we ever see the Brigadier in television?
No, he. I don't think so. I thought he showed up in New Who, like in David Tennant's time.
They reference him, but he doesn't appear on screen.
Yeah, I know he was gonna appear in Matt Smith's time, but he died, and so they reference him there. But I thought he reappeared in David Tennant's time, but I could be mistaken.
Yeah, I was going to quickly see if I could find. But at this point, he's retired from UNIT. And
right.
As
and
we've seen,
he's retiring from the school that we saw him at, and he was teaching at what in America would be called a private school.
Right. And they call it public school, which is very confusing.
They mean the opposite things in America.
Yes.
But he was teaching at this school in the Seventh Doctor's time after he retired from UNIT, and in the Fifth Doctor's time, actually.
Right.
And he's now retiring from that. There's a reference to him having a retirement party there.
Right. Because we saw him the last time we saw him in Classic Who with, was it the Seventh Doctor or the Sixth? There was a Seventh Doctor story.
Yeah.
Where he was retired from UNIT. So, yeah. I'm a little fuzzy on the exact sequence of things given timey-wimey-ness.
There also, and this is something that's a little more behind the scenes, but in addition to the actors playing Professor Travers and Victoria Waterfield and the Brigadier and Sarah Jane Smith, who are all the original actors from the TV show, they have a couple of other actors from the TV show playing different parts. One of them is this DJ at New World University who's like, I guess, playing records on the local campus radio station or something. And he initially is mouthing New World University propaganda, but he eventually turns and wants to expose the truth, at which point things go badly for him and he gets webbed up and dies. But he's played by John Leeson, who is one of the two voices of K9. And there's a bum in this named Herods, which is a joke name. I forget he's got a longer name. It's like Haraldson or something. Yeah. But they call him Herods because he's an ex-military guy who is very picky, and even though he's a bum. And that's a reference to Harrods department store in England, which is like high-class department store. It's like Macy's or something. Right. And so, but he is played by Jeffrey Beavers. And Jeffrey Beavers is the decayed master who takes over the body of Nissa's father and becomes the Anthony Ainley master. So we've got a canine and a master in this as well. And there's this great moment where when the Brigadier first meets Herods, he's been attacked by the Chili's and the Yeti, and he's stunned and he's kind of fallen to a sidewalk, and Herods runs up to him and he says, the Brigadier says, "Is that you? Have you changed yourself again?" Yep. And he's thinking Herods is the Doctor, but it's actually the actor who played a version of the Master. Right. Which is, deeply ironic. But we never if you want to headcanon that, though, the Master is known to wear disguises. So this could be a temporarily, functionally on the side of good version of the Master.
I suppose. And the Doctor is never mentioned by even title in this one, I don't think, right? No, they don't even say Doctor, do they? They don't say Doctor, but they do refer to him. Yes. And they do that several times. They'll talk about a friend or something, a way of, and it's clear if you're a fan, they're talking about the Doctor. Also, there's a great bit that they reference at the end of the episode when the plot has been resolved and Sarah Jane is walking along with the Brigadier as they're about to meet his grandson, and they're just talking about stuff. And there's a moment in an early Tom Baker episode
where Sarah Jane comes out wearing this flowing white dress. And the doctor says that belonged to Victoria. She traveled with me for a time. And Sarah Jane makes a smart aleck remark, and they revisit that in this because now Sarah Jane has met Victoria. And so she's reminiscent about that moment with the Brigadier, and she says, it was Victoria's dress. And I said, well, as long as Albert didn't wear it, meaning Prince Albert and Queen Victoria.
Right.
And so she reminisces about that moment, and I thought that was a nice little inclusion.
We should mention, again, because I'm sure we mentioned it before, but Victoria Waterfield, played by Deborah Watling, Professor Travers, played by Jack Watling, father-daughter.
Yep. And they're not father and daughter in this story. Professor Travers is not the father of Victoria Waterfield, but they are real life father and daughter, and they do play on that in this because as Professor Travers is getting back his memory, he's having his own memories of his daughter, and she's kind of like wondering, are we somehow related? And he's like, oh no, that wasn't you. So they play on that on that off-screen relationship as well.
Is this, from a timeline perspective, the last appearance of the Great Intelligence?
Well, the Great Intelligence does come back in the 11th Doctor's time for a couple of stories. He comes back in the Snowmen, the Christmas special,
which is in the past from this point, right?
Yes,
it was Victorian.
But then he comes back in Clara Oswald's time. In the finale of Matt Smith, where Clara has to fix his timeline.
Right.
And so that occurs later than this one in the Great Intelligence's timeline.
Okay. I don't know if we said it. I should make sure we say it up front. This takes place in 1995. That's when this direct to VHS was released.
They also establish in this, I mean, this is just one data point that's conflicted by other shows, but they establish in this that the second Doctor's time and the beginning of the Unit era was in 1970. Because when they reference the events of the Web of Fear, they say it was like 20 years ago, and I did the math, and it was like 1970, or I guess I could have done it wrong. It could have been 75, but in any event, that's one more piece of data for the unit date in controversy.
Unless they say something explicit on screen, will never get resolved. So we start with Victoria in going back to the Det Sen monastery in Tibet.
From the Abominable Snowmen.
From the Abominable Snowmen, okay. Why did she go back there? She's called by something?
Yeah, she was hearing her father's voice in her dreams. Now, her father, for people who may not remember, was Professor Waterfield, was a 19th century scientist who used mirrors to invent a time machine, and he was hoping to contact people in other times, and he found the Daleks. And so in The Evil of the Daleks, I want to say, that's when he and Victoria are introduced, and he ends up dying on Skaro. And so that's what she's referring to at the beginning when she arrives at the Det Sen monastery. She tells the monk who's guarding the place that, my father died on an alien world, but I've been called here by hearing his voice in my dreams.
Right. And her last... where did the doctor drop her off? It wasn't back in her own time. It was with a family.
It was later. Yeah. And so that's why she's in the 20th century, even though she was born like 140 years earlier.
Right. Yeah, she had like foster parents. We saw that in an animated Fury from the Deep, I think it was.
Yeah, Fury from the Deep.
That's where she was.
Another second Doctor story. She left in order to make way for Zoe, who frankly I think is a much better companion. I mean, I like Victoria, but I like Zoe even better. Right.
Victoria was young. She was like 14 or 15. She was a teenager when she traveled with the Doctor. So Zoe is a little more mature.
She does participate in one of the great Patrick Troughton moments, though, in Tomb of the Cybermen. She is talking to the second Doctor about family because she's just lost hers. her dad is dead now.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's talking to him about family. And it's like, well, don't you have any family? And he's like, well, of course I do. And I think about them from time to time, and they live again in my mind. And it's a very touching, comforted moment that sheds a little bit of background on the Doctor, but also relates it to his companion's experience.
Right. Yeah. She does say in this downtime, she doesn't know where she belongs anymore because she's been in so many places. And I would assume that's sort of a common experience for companions, right? They kind of get this idea that once companions leave the TARDIS, they don't quite fit in anymore because of the experiences they've had, which is natural, I think.
Look at Rose Tyler.
Right. Whereas I think Sarah Jane is the one who adjusts best back to normal life. I mean, she sort of continues adventures, including Sarah Jane Adventures, which is a show.
Yep.
But she seems to be, I don't know, the most resilient of all of the companions we ever get to see again, in that circumstance.
At least that we get to see the most about.
Yes, that's true. So we have this New World University. The New World Order was a big deal back in the mid-90s. This concept of this new, the fall of the Soviet Union, the old world order of the East and West, communism versus the free countries. There was this idea that those had fallen and there was a new world order rising. And some people were afraid of this idea of...
Yeah, which is not the original New World Order that was allegedly introduced, or supposed to be introduced by the American Revolution.
Yes.
That's where the Latin phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum, or New World Order, comes from. It's like we're finally doing democracy in a representative way without monarchs.
Right. And in the 90s, it was more an idea of the rise of secret cabals running things. And so I feel like this kind of plays off that mid-90s, a little bit of paranoia about such things, as well as an aversion to what was popularly called cults, although I know you prefer not to use that term.
New religious movements.
Exactly. So, and I think it kind of plays off of that as well, a little bit. So it's of its time, very much so. And the followers, the university students who are followers of this movement of the Great Intelligence, they call them Chilies, which I think is funny.
I'm not sure why they call them that. I guess they're pretty chill. They're pretty relaxed.
No, they actually say at one point they Chilies because they're the children of the of the organization of the movement.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's sort of a abbreviation of that. Another element I really liked actually in this was I have an affinity for the British narrowboats. Britain is covered in these canals. And there's grown up this culture of these very narrow houseboats that you mentioned that Kate lives on, that people travel on up and down, and it's this mobile
kind of like our RVs here in America.
Yeah, and it was really neat and kind of fun to see that. Kate lives on one with her son. It's kind of a neat addition. I mean, they didn't have to have her living in a narrowboat; she could have lived anywhere. So I thought it was a neat little addition to the story.
It's also, it plays a role in how the Brigadier learns about his grandson, because once they don't know what the locus is. There apparently have been a series of locuses or loci that the Great Intelligence has been destroying in order to unleash its power, and there's one left, and they don't know what it is, but they suspect the Brigadier has it, and he has no idea he's got it, but he starts reminiscing about these adventures that he had involved in the Great Intelligence, specifically the Web of Fear. And he mentions he used to have a little figurine of a Yeti, and he thought it was of Tibetan origin. And that triggered, but he doesn't know where it is. And that triggers a thought in Kate. And she says, oh, I've had that since I was a child. And she then goes rummaging in this box of her son's toys and pulls it out. And afterwards, the Brigadier is like, why do you have a box of toys on your narrowboat? And she said, well, there's something I haven't told you, Dad.
Right. Yes. That's how he learns he has a grandson. And that figurine we see that at the end of, is it Web of Fear that he's given it as a souvenir is on screen?
Is it? I don't remember that.
I thought I saw a reference to that somewhere that it's on screen. And they actually refer to these events. They say, Sarah Jane has been hired to write profiles of certain people, and it was their attempt to use her to find the Brigadier. Sarah Jane says they're all connected to an event in central London 25 years ago that shut down
25 years ago. Yeah, it was 1970.
Yes, it shut down the city for months, but nobody remembers it. And that's the events of the Web of Fear, when the underground, the tube, was being filled with these webs from the Great Intelligence, and the Second Doctor and all. It was running around there with the first appearance of at the time, Colonel Lethbridge Stewart.
Right.
Okay, and so the Great Intelligence is trying to find everybody. So presumably, Benton, was Benton in that one?
Benton was not. He was introduced in the Third Doctor's time.
Right, he was, yeah. I think, in fact, Lethbridge Stewart was the only one from UNIT that continued.
Right, and it wasn't even, I don't think it was UNIT at the time. I think he was in the British forces.
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to think what else. He's invested the internet. For younger folks, the internet was really a brand new thing then. I mean, 1995 was, it was still hard to get on the internet. You maybe have
those dial-up modems. They were awful.
And yet, what you had was these little islands, AOL, CompuServe, Prodigy, these little services you dialed directly into. And then if you were at a university or connected to a university or a company, you might be able to connect to the internet, or if you were super geeky and figured out a way to connect. But the internet was hard to get in 1995. It was early days.
I liked how they play on the World Wide Web, which was like the new killer app. I mean, email was the first killer app for the internet.
Yeah.
And then the next killer app was the World Wide Web. And they don't make it totally explicit, but at least the way I read it is they're playing on World Wide Web with the web that the Great Intelligence generates.
Right.
And I think that's a nice connection using things of that time that were like big culturally significant things. And it's like, well, let's give this a twist of it's a World Wide Web that's going to control humanity and turn us all into Yetis.
Well, we're not quite at the Yeti stage, but I think we've got the other two going. Because the websites, web was not the internet at the time. Like, it wasn't the same thing. We had email.
It was a use of the internet, a subset.
We had Usenet. We had different protocols for connecting over the internet in various ways. That was. It's fun to look at this. When you watch these things, especially when it's technology involved in the past, you really got to get the context of the time to really appreciate some of the elements of it. I think that's one of the things that, especially when was created within your lifetime. Like going back to look at episodes in the 70s or 80s and that were especially like Third Doctor stories. You really need to understand the context of the time.
Yeah, and with the web here, it's not as cheesy as Melanie Bush and her megabyte modem in the final episode of the Sixth Doctor, but it has some of that feel. Only here, I think they've done it more cleverly.
They have. Any other notes on this one?
A few, yeah. This being the 1990s, it's interesting that Kate Lethbridge Stewart has really 1980s big hair. Also, I liked in the directing, this was an example of, how we're dealing with people who know what they're doing here. The way they reveal who the relationship between Kate and her father is very interesting, because Kate is like talking on the phone to someone about her father, and we don't at first know who her father is. And then they pan across the narrowboat, and we see a picture of Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, and it's immediately obvious that's who her father is.
Right.
And so that's the way that we get introduced to their relationship. And then there's a callback to that later in the episode where we're at the Brigadier's house, and he's waking up after having been asleep for 3 days under the influence of apparently Daniel Hinton, having visions of stuff on the astral plane, which Hinton, given all the Tibetan theming in this, correctly refers to as the bardo. The bardo is the intermediate state in Tibetan religion. So like the Tibetan Book of the Dead is called the Bardo Thadol. And you take the Book of the Dead and you read it to a person who either is dying or has recently died to guide them through the bardo and help them either attain liberation if possible, or help them obtain a better reincarnation if possible. So they're actually using, concepts in a correct way from Tibetan religion, and they mention automatic write-in, and that's from Western esotericism, but they're using these concepts correctly, which I appreciate. They're not just making up stuff. But later on, after the Brigadier is woken up from his 3-day nap, he's thinking about Kate, and in his house we see a picture of Kate, and so she's got a picture of him, he's got a picture of her. It's a nice, emotionally move-in connection between the two, where their relationship, they're both invested in the other. They just haven't spoken for a long time, but they both genuinely care about each other, as shown by the fact they've got pictures of each other around.
We should point out it's a different actress in this than eventually we'll get in the BBC Doctor Who in the new Who. I suppose
I haven't checked that.
Yeah, it's Beverly Cressman in the original, and it's Gemma Redgrave in the new Who.
Right.
Yeah.
I knew it was Gemma Redgrave. Now, I think they did an excellent job recasting then, because the original actress has notes that Gemma Redgrave uses.
Yeah.
So they come across as the same person.
Yep.
Another thing that I liked in this is they brought back elements of the Abominable Snowmen and the Web of Fear, like in addition to the Yeti, which were robots, and the Great Intelligence, they also had this silver ball that would roll around and do stuff.
Yeah.
And they have the silver ball back. So they're using it to they turn people into Yeti, which frankly I don't get. You're turning someone into a robot? How is that working?
That was a little, tricky.
Yeah. One thing, a criticism I had is the acting of everybody who's connected with New World University, and that includes Victoria. It also includes her assistant, and it includes the Chili's. It's all stilted and creepy. They're trying to be creepy, and it comes across as stilted. So that's a criticism I have on the acting front. I think the acting is weak for those characters.
The assistant at the university, like Victoria's assistant, is he's like the PR guy or something like that. Yeah, which the creepy PR guy works pretty good. I agree that the acting is stilted, but the idea that it's the PR guy who's the marketing guy, it's kind of fun.
They're trying to send a signal these people are creepy and you don't know what they're up to, and they're holding back, until later in the story what exactly they're up to. But I just find this to be a cliched acting trope. Or directing trope. So I think that I think the best creepy acting is when they're not acting creepy. It's like, for me, the best, spirit possession acting I've ever seen is of Kiko O'Brien, right, on Deep Space Nine, when she's possessed by a pot wraith, and she's acting totally normal. and she's not being creepy, and it's so much more creepy because of how not creepy she is. Like at one point she's eating a box of chocolates and she's like, Miles, you're not going to let me eat this whole box of chocolates by myself, are you? And it's like, knowing this is being said by a pa wraith,
right?
And it seems so normal, that's what's creepy. It's not all the stilted stuff.
Right.
Also, I'd note that the Brigadier has a really fancy gun that he takes with him because he's on his way into London, and because of things are beginning to be connected by the internet, the Great Intelligence is able to cause a traffic snarl in London with, delayed trains and delayed walk lights and all kinds of stuff. So the Brigadier is stuck in the middle of this traffic jam, and he is seeing strange stuff. Like he sees visions of Victoria in some kind of weird cloak. He sees visions of Daniel Hinton, and he sees Yeti. Mm-hmm. And I don't have a problem with the visions he's seeing or the fact they don't explain them. I'm fine with that as a mystical touch to this episode. But a Yeti shows up, and he gets out of his car and points his gun at the Yeti, and there's a visual effect, and the Yeti just vanishes. Like he's got a disintegrator.
I don't think the Yeti was actually there. I think he's seeing projections. I think it's like astral projections.
Okay, could be, but it visually, it looked to me like he shot the Yeti with an ordinary 9mm Glock, and it caused it to disappear.
Yeah, right. It was ambiguous, but I think it was like, because there was at times where he saw like Daniel's face, mm-hmm. and there was but it was really someone else. Like he was superimposed on, and I think mm-hmm. it was like remnants of his visit to the astral plane where Daniel was talking to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I did like about this is towards the climax, as they're building to the climax, we've got all the main characters at New World University, and the Brigadier is down talking to the Great Intelligence, who at the moment is in the body of Professor Travers. And the Brigadier sees Sarah Jane up on a walkway. This is all outside in like the university courtyard. Mm-hmm. And he sees her up on a walkway, and he's talking really loud. And he explains that the way the computer system is set up, because the Great Intelligence has been boasting about it's going to take over the world. And the Brigadier is like, oh, yes, but at the moment you're confined to the mainframe of this university. So if someone were to come along and disconnect the mainframe, then you would be done. And he knows that Sarah Jane is listening. He's deliberately talking to Sarah Jane and trusts her enough to know she's going to understand what he's saying and go do it. And I like that trust between the Brigadier and Sarah Jane, because they've worked together multiple times before. And so I really like that. Also, there's just a nice little, and Sarah Jane isn't in that much of this. She's largely absent for the middle of the story.
Yeah.
She's there in the beginning, and then she kind of reappears for the climax and is very present once that happens. But the middle is more Victoria. Although Victoria is really all the way through it. But there's one point where there's this who can you trust plot, where even some members of UNIT have been corrupted by the Great Intelligence. Apparently not all of them, but some of them. And they're exchanging a phone message where they say the Brigadier and Sarah are both part of this phone message exchange. And they say, quote the codes NN and QQ when contacting UNIT. Mm-hmm. And NN was the production code for the Abominable Snowmen, and QQ was the production code for the Web of Fear.
That was a nice little Easter egg.
Yeah.
The New World University location they filmed at is East Anglia University in Norfolk. Mm-hmm. And I've seen this location in a lot of British movies and TV shows. They use it a lot, and it's this very
kind of
distinctive.
like Simon Fraser University up in British Columbia. That shows up all the time in science fiction shows.
I know, it was like it's several different Stargate episodes, and
Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, yes. This Norfolk, the East Anglia University, it's got this brutalist architectural style, and it's very much. It's just the worst of we are as guilty of it here in America, but some of the worst of the architecture of the 1960s and 70s in Britain.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, it's like, wow, this place looks terrible.
It's Boston City Hall is one of the worst public buildings in America or in the world, and I can't imagine having to work in these concrete monstrosities, like that. But I just had to mention, I saw a couple of things recently where they used this location. So I think that about does it for our discussion. I do want to mention, I should have mentioned up front, if folks want to see this, you don't have to work too hard to see it. We'll put a link in the show notes. It's on YouTube, the whole thing. They posted it there, so you can go to YouTube and watch Downtime there and enjoy it in all its mid-90s glory.
And there are some other Doctor Who fan productions similar to this that I don't think we'll wait till episode 500 to cover them, but we can pepper in a few more of them to give you a sense of more of the range of stuff that fans were producing during the long dark.
Yeah, the long dark is a good way to put it. Excellent, very good. So that's it. It's for
also
our
a Babylon 5 reference.
Yes, that's it for our 400th episode, and we are grateful first to everyone who listens. That's one thing I want to say is that we're very grateful for all of you who've been with us, whether you've been with us for one episode or 400. This show doesn't exist without you listening, so we really do appreciate all the fans. But we also especially want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Brian B., J. Michael T., William N., Father Jason S., and Lizzie G. Their generous tax-deductible donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. This StarQuest show is also brought to you by Exodus 90 and the Exodus 90 Challenge, which begins this year on January 20th. This isn't just a 90-day program. Exodus 90 is a spirituality for men in modern times, built on 3 ancient pillars: prayer, self-sacrifice, and fraternity. We all long for something more, and that something is to be found in becoming the men that God created us to be, sons of a loving Father. It's time to turn away from our idols. It's time to break free from the pharaohs that hold us in bondage. If you're ready to make a fresh start, to break free, refocus, and rediscover who God is calling you to be in the new year, and embark on a journey to uncommon freedom in Jesus Christ, then download the Exodus 90 app today. We start January 20th, 2025, so go to exodus90.com/SQPN to learn more about Exodus 90. That's exodus90.com/SQPN. And we'd also like to thank Zyman Yannick, who edited this episode. And so that's it from us. We'd love to know what you think of Downtime. If you go check it out on YouTube and then let us know what you thought, we would love to hear from you. You can do that by going to our show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com. Visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/Discord, or you can watch the Secrets of Doctor Who on YouTube, where at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where you can like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 5th Doctor story, Resurrection of the Daleks. So until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thanks, Tom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest, and remember, have the best one yet.